Welcome back, everyone! If you're the kind of focused learner who really wants to know how the world's most complex organizations actually operate behind the scenes, well, you're in the perfect place for today's explainer. We are cracking open a genuinely fascinating document, the Strategic Toolkit Guide for the UNICEF Controller. And let me tell you, this is definitely not your average corporate finance manual. Nope, this is the ultimate playbook for a role that handles literally billions of dollars, and the stakes? They couldn't be higher. We're talking about fiercely protecting the integrity of global funds, while at the exact same time making sure that money can instantly deploy to save lives in the world's most vulnerable regions. It's the ultimate balancing act.
Okay, let's dive into this, because to truly wrap our heads around the gravity of this strategy, we first have to understand the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the operation. 190. That is the number of countries and territories where UNICEF operates. Just think about what that actually means for a financial leader. As the comptroller, you aren't just sitting in New York or Geneva managing money in highly stable, predictable environments. You are simultaneously managing massive financial flows in fragile states, in places with completely unreliable banking infrastructure, and right smack in the middle of active war zones.
Which brings us to the core paradox of the whole job. I want you to step into the shoes of a top-tier financial executive for a second. Ask yourself, how do you audit an active crisis? Really think about it. In a normal corporation, if a process breaks, you hit pause, you investigate, maybe you add some red tape. But here, if you freeze operations during a sudden earthquake because some procurement form isn't perfectly filled out, well, people don't get emergency supplies. But on the flip side, if you just abandon the rules entirely, you invite fraud, and you instantly lose the trust of the donors who make the whole operation possible.
That intense tension perfectly sets up Section 1, the Financial Balancing Act. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast between traditional Wall Street finance and UNICEF's incredibly unique model. A financial leader in this context has to fiercely protect every single dollar. Sure, but they have to do it in a way that actively enables life-saving agility on the ground. If you're a corporate CFO, your absolute North Star is maximizing shareholder profit, right? Your decisions are driven by margins and market share. But this guide introduces a brilliant concept called mandate-centered financial leadership. Here, the ultimate goal is maximizing equitable results for children. The value of a dollar isn't measured in a stock dividend, it's measured in its capacity to deliver a vaccine, build a school, or get clean water into a disaster zone. Efficiency can't weaken control, but control absolutely cannot obstruct urgent action. To pull off this massive mandate, the executive summary builds the financial architecture on these 10 foundational pillars. We're looking at governance, integrated budgeting, internal control, enterprise risk, financial integrity, treasury stewardship, operational support, digital transformation, people and culture, and finally, mission impact. Now, the genius of laying it out exactly like this is that it stops these insanely complex global operations from devolving into disconnected technical silos. Budgeting has to talk to risk, digital transformation has to actually serve operational support, and the whole shebang has to be driven by people and culture.
So how do you actually make all those pillars work on a global scale? Let's move right into Section 2, Governance, across 190 countries. The comptroller's job is basically building a coherent system of regulations, policies, and committees across a massively decentralized organization. The text explicitly states a golden rule. Global policy and local accountability must reinforce one another. Headquarters has to set rigorous global standards. You absolutely need one single version of the truth, authoritative rules, and strict anti-fraud measures. But you also have to bake in proportionate risk-informed flexibility. Because let's be real, the controls you need in a super stable office in New York are not the exact same ones you need during a massive earthquake response. If country offices are just drowning in headquarters bureaucracy during a literal emergency, then the governance has totally failed the mission.
Let's see how this builds into the strategic budget formulation process, because an agile mission absolutely requires an integrated plan. It's like a giant puzzle. Step 1 is defining those strategic priorities. Step 2, and this is absolutely crucial, is mapping those priorities directly against your actual resource and operational capacity. And Step 3 is establishing risk-informed budgets. This structured step-by-step process is a game changer because it forces leaders to expose all those difficult trade-offs early on. It stops the organization from making these grand, ambitious promises that aren't actually linked to what they can pull off with the available funding.
But hey, what happens when things inevitably don't go according to the budget? Welcome to Section 3, Anticipating the Unknown.
We're pivoting here to a massive operational shift detailed in the guide, moving from just reacting to problems after they happen to anticipating risks before they even show up. The text uses a pretty dense institutional term for this, ex ante enterprise risk management. Now, ex ante is just a fancy Latin way of saying before the event. So this is the forward-looking identification and treatment of financial, operational, and humanitarian risks way before your exposure turns into an actual loss or disruption. And why is this so vital? Well, waiting for a traditional post-facto audit to tell you that your controls were weak last year is quite frankly way too late for a country office managing a live disaster response today.
So how does this proactive risk model actually play out on the ground? It's basically a three-step cycle. First up, early risk identification. That means spotting the cyber threats, the fraud vulnerabilities, or those tricky supply chain bottlenecks super early. Second is scenario testing, asking what if, and actually planning the response. And third, linking risk to budgets and controls. Risk registers shouldn't just be boring administrative documents collecting dust in a drawer. They have to directly dictate how money is allocated and how authority is handed out.
Let's look at one specific risk area that really drives this point home. Ask yourself, what is the true cost of a delayed wire transfer in a disaster zone? Obviously, it's a rhetorical question, but the answer is staggering. It could literally mean life-saving medicine sitting on a hot tarmac instead of reaching a rural clinic. To put that into perspective, this highlights why liquidity policy and cash forecasting are literally matters of life and death in this role. The comptroller has to maintain enough cash buffers to respond to sudden emergencies, but they can't just leave massive pools of funds inefficiently sitting idle. It is a razor-thin wire to walk, for sure.
To walk that wire efficiently, you desperately need modern tools, which brings us to Section 4, Modernizing a Global Mission.
And this brilliantly illustrates the text's massive push for the future, leaning heavily onto automation, responsible artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. Because let's face it, you cannot run a 21st century global humanitarian response on a bunch of 20th century spreadsheets. The strategy pushes hard for process simplification, automated financial controls, and incredibly robust financial data protection. You have to modernize the tools to keep pace with changing demands on the ground, all while keeping highly sensitive data locked down from cyber threats.
All of this technology enables what's called an agile finance operating model. First, you need standardized global processes, making sure everyone is speaking the exact same financial language. Then, clear escalation pathways so problems are actually solved, not just buried under a rug somewhere. You implement shared services to chew through high-volume transactions efficiently. And most importantly, you provide differentiated field support based on risk, meaning headquarters gives a lot more hands-on, rapid support to a high-risk regional office in the middle of a crisis than they do to a low-risk, highly capable office somewhere else. It dramatically increases both speed and accountability.
Everything we've talked about builds up to our final focus. Section 5, the ultimate ROI, children.
Every ledger, every spreadsheet, every single treasury investment, and every automated control ties directly back to a single human outcome. So the crucial point here is this concept of trusted enablement. I absolutely love this phrase from the text. Financial transformation must achieve trusted enablement. It means the financial systems are rigorous enough to fully safeguard the resources entrusted by donors, but practical enough to actually work in incredibly difficult field conditions. The rules aren't there to stop action. No, they are purposefully designed to make rapid action safe and completely reliable.
Let me leave you with this powerful quote straight from the source material, because it is an absolute mic drop moment that perfectly summarizes the stark contrast between traditional corporate finance and true mandate-centered leadership. The ultimate test of a control is whether it helps UNICEF reach children effectively, equitably, safely, and sustainably. That is the absolute bottom line. It's not just about getting a clean audit, it is entirely about whether this system actually delivered on the mission.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to end today's explainer. Take a look at your own workflows, your own teams, or your own business. Is your organization's finance holding you back, or is it pushing your mission forward? Because as we've seen today, when financial controls are purposefully designed as engines for impact rather than just bureaucratic obstacles, the results can quite literally change the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay focused, and I'll see you in the next explainer.